It might be time for me to stop predicting Winnipeg Jets wins because unfortunately they fell to Detroit this past weekend. Not the best game, not the worst. Let's chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we are continuing conversations about, the recent slate of games, and the Jets dropped another one. I can officially say that they have not won a single game in 2025. This is a rather small sample size, but the joke still stands. Winnipeg has only gotten 1 point so far to start the year, so, probably not the way that I'm sure they wanted to kick 2025 off, but historically, the Jets in January, it's always a bit of a topsy-turvy time. Winnipeg in this month, for whatever reason, just does not seem to play that well. I will say that I don't think the game against Detroit was quite as bad in some areas, but there were definitely some moments where Winnipeg, quite frankly, just needs to be better. We'll chat about that in just a brief moment, but before we go any further, thought you would want to know that tonight's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $250 in bonus bets if you win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, like I said, the Jets dropped yet another game. This is their third loss if we're going to consider, an overtime loss around the same level of value, right? Obviously, you did get a point against Anaheim, but not getting points against Detroit is a little frustrating. And I think the way that the Jets kind of put themselves in an early hole really signifies that, yes, Winnipeg still has work to do. The Jets haven't exactly been at the races the last couple of weeks. I think there were some games where Winnipeg was very good, and then some games where they were kind of a little up and down. And what's sort of funny at this, the center of all of this is that the top line has actually been doing pretty decently, but it's kind of like everyone else may be having some issues. So I guess, maybe the monkey's paw sort of curled. The top line finally plays pretty decent hockey, and then everything else kind of starts to come apart at the seams. Not been that bad, though. I think that'd be a really extreme read. What I think the Detroit game showed was that Winnipeg sometimes still has that habit of starting really slowly, less so this year than in previous seasons, but it was definitely on display in this past game. The Wings really came out swinging. They outshot the Jets like 15-4 or something in the first period. Maybe it wasn't that lopsided. Pretty sure it was not far off, though. And Winnipeg really just struggled to get anything going, right? Detroit seemed to have the forecheck, the pressure, all of that turned up to 11, and Winnipeg really struggled to answer. Now, once you got to the second and third periods, the Jets definitely had an answer. Detroit started looking very pedestrian, but at that point, they were kind of already in the lead. And, Winnipeg did manage to claw back a goal or two, but it just wasn't enough. And, you watch the way that Winnipeg conceded, and there were some sloppy plays. I know Heinola is going to get a lot of flack for allowing DeBrincat on the inside. That was actually one of the first times I can recall recently where a forward who had the inside step really got the shot off quite cleanly against Ville. He's usually pretty good at tying the stick up and at least pushing the puck towards the side, but this time he just got beat. And I kind of feel like Iafallo really fumbled the puck between two Red Wings skaters. That didn't really help. And then DeBrincat was already on the inside. And I did point out that DeBrincat was one of the few guys I was watching out for. He gets a dirty goal. And, it just feels emblematic of what happened with Winnipeg, right? Larkin had a power play goal. Mason Raymond had a power play goal. And it felt like the Jets really struggled to build momentum. And, eventually, yes, after a really bad first period, Winnipeg definitely picked things up and started to improve pretty significantly, but it was just too late, right? At that point, the Jets are already behind. Morrissey did pull off a pretty nice solo slap shot goal. But beyond that, I think this game kind of showcases why I still have some reservations about this team. I think Winnipeg is very solid. I think at times very good, but when it comes to their regular season performance, I don't look at that as much. I'm curious to know how the coaching staff adjusts to adversity. Right, Colin Miller had a pretty serious injury, puck to the neck, not good. And guess who ended up stepping up and being one of the most used defenders in his stead? It was Logan Stanley. And I look at some of this decision making and what the Jets are trying to do and improvise with, and I can't say that I like where their mindset is. I often think that the Jets really struggle to know where their weak links are and why they're not working. And when they do try to switch things up, like, maybe putting Lowry at second line center or something, it feels like a half measure that's interesting, but it doesn't go and address some of the core issues, right? If you look at the top line, when the top line's doing poorly, usually it's because the duo of Shifley and Connor is struggling with something, whether it's transition play, defensive awareness, something along those lines. It begins to be a problem. Doubly so if you have a bad defensive pairing on the ice, then you get both groups being pinned very deep in the defensive zone, and Shifley's line basically becomes a non-factor. Now, because Connor has been so good this year, I think that that's been a lot less of a problem. I think there are some flags in the top line's performance, even in games like this where they play pretty well, where you're still wondering a little bit about how real and how sustainable their success is. You look at the Corsi numbers, they're about break even. Shots and chances for and against about split down the middle, which is kind of not great for a top line. Usually, if you're a first line, you want them doing more like 40, 54, 55, sometimes even 56%, rather than kind of being split down the middle. Now, the expected goals are looking pretty nicely because of the dangerous chances the Jets have been getting, especially with those cross-lot passes. But I don't know, against teams like Vegas and Colorado, you see a lot less of that. So for the Jets, against slower teams, it doesn't happen to be as much of a problem. But I feel like, I just see things where I get what the Jets are thinking, and I understand why they're trying some of these experiments, but I really feel like they're not making the right adjustments and coming up with some new ideas. If the top line remains together, that's fine. At this point, actually, I would almost wonder if Ehlers needs to go up there more for his own sake than for him fixing the line, right? Nick has kind of been slow at 5v5. He did have a goal in this game, but generally speaking, was not particularly good against Detroit. And it's been an increasing trend where, sure, the points have kind of been noticeable, but he's playing with Perfetti, and neither of them really play that well together. And Nemesnikov is really not helping the whole situation. So I'm kind of at a loss with how the coaching staff sometimes tries to solve and resolve some of their issues creating. And I do wonder at what point, will the Jets start to experiment more? Are they okay with these games? Do they really feel like this group is good enough as is? Because if that's the case, then I would expect the Jets to not last long in the playoffs. I don't think that's their true assessment, but I could be wrong. And I do worry that, we're going to see Winnipeg repeat some of the same mistakes that they've made in past playoff runs. And I always get, yelled at online for complaining about a team that's basically in first place. And I get all that. But the thing is, I don't really care about the regular season so much. If you're not playing the right way, and if you're not winning the right way, and if Hellebuck and the power play are the two things that are carrying you through a season, that's not going to help you in the postseason. Hellebuck might be enough for a couple of games. The power play might be able to get you within touching distance, but at a time when everything, tends to be more at even strength, the Jets are going to have to figure out how to play better at 5v5. Yes, Winnipeg was maybe a bit unlucky against Detroit, but that first period was absolutely not about luck. The Jets got walked over, and I feel like it just wasn't a good enough game from Winnipeg on the whole. So, it is what it is. You're going to have swoons throughout the season, sometimes early, sometimes later. You're going to have games where you go dry and you're playing well. You're going to have games where you just suck. And I think that this wasn't necessarily a game where the Jets just sucked, but they weren't good either. And so I'm having trouble seeing where the team goes from here, but they have a chance to right their wrongs again against the Nashville Predators. They just beat them 3-0 a week or so ago. Now they have a chance to beat them again and hopefully get Hellebuck his 300th win. He is still sitting out there waiting for that to happen. So we'll chat about what to expect from a Preds lineup that does look a little bit different from the last time the Jets saw him. But before we dive into all of that, I did want to tell you about our friends and partners at FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $250 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. If you are looking for something, maybe a line that would be of interest, I think about a line for Ravens scoring against the Steelers defense this weekend. Traditionally, the spread has not favored Baltimore against Pittsburgh. This weekend, though, I'm feeling pretty good about the Ravens going on the over. I would say more than a touchdown. I just have that feeling that Lamar and the offense are going to be locked in, even without Flowers, especially at home. But Baltimore versus Pittsburgh, it can be a dicey prop. So be sure to join the action right now and visit FanDuel.com to join today. And again, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets if you put down that $5 bet. Win or lose doesn't matter. Only with FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, so welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we're chatting a little bit about the Jets and, some of their recent struggles. I would say that at 5v5, Winnipeg has kind of been treading water the last couple of months. Sometimes they've been better. The game against Toronto I thought was really nice. Their last game against Nashville, who they'll be playing later today, was pretty good. But otherwise, the Jets haven't had as many standout performances. And really, I'm just waiting for them to play well against Vegas and Colorado consistently. Yeah, you're not going to see those teams as much, but for me, those are the benchmarks. And the Jets are playing Colorado again pretty soon here. A division rival, really one of the best teams in the NHL, a squad that's been very hot. And look, I know that Minnesota may be above them in the standings, but we all know which team is the real playoff contender, right? Vegas and Colorado are the benchmarks because they've actually won a cup before, and they both play a style of very fast, very aggressive, very rapid hockey that has always given the Jets problems. A tune-up against Nashville may not get the Jets as close to Nirvana as you're hoping for. I think Winnipeg has, recently been better against Nashville than they were perhaps at the start of the season. I don't know that I'm going to read a ton into this game, but, all the same, a win is a win, right? Especially if the Jets can bounce back after a not great stretch of their past 3 games. But for Nashville, the Preds are looking for some kind of a spark, I guess. They've played more competently recently, but they're still not a good team. And I think at this point, they're thinking more about a draft pick than anything and maybe being sellers. And what's interesting is this lineup is pretty considerably different in their bottom 6 than when we saw them a week or so ago. Up front, you've still got Forsberg, Stamkos, and Marchessault together. That line was decent. Didn't really have as many clear-cut looks against the Jets, but, on the power play, still not a group that you really want to get too fancy with. And Stamkos has been finally starting to heat up a little bit for the Preds, so not a squad that, you want to necessarily underestimate. But as long as the Jets play relatively cleanly and don't give Forsberg in particular as many looks, I think you can take away a lot of that top line's punch. I know Marchessault has been heating up too, but I'm a little less concerned about him. Winnipeg has seen enough of Marchessault over the years. We sort of know what to expect from his forechecking and his shiftiness. Your second line, you've got Nyquist, O'Reilly, and Hinostroza. Yeah, Hinostroza coming in probably doesn't make this line that much better, but I guess he can forecheck and maybe assist there a little bit. The second line to me is just not particularly great, but I don't know. I don't really know who else would be called up to handle this sort of stuff. Ideally, the Preds like to run a fairly decent top nine, less so right now. They're dealing with a couple of injuries, Tommy Novak being one of them. That's partly why they've got Fedor Zvechkov as the 3C alongside Evangelista and Jankowski, which it'll be interesting, right? Winnipeg should be able to take advantage of a younger player in Svechkov, and you've got some youth there, and Jankowski, not exactly a high end top nine scorer, so on paper, the Jets have a pretty sizable matchup advantage. And then on the fourth line, you've got Wise, Blatt, McCarron, and Sissons. Again, a line that I think the Jets should be able to take advantage of. We'll be curious to see what happens with Wise, Blatt throughout the game. A young rookie, obviously a very talented prospect. And I think a lot of Preds fans are hoping that he can become a bigger part of that top six in the future. But in this game for the Jets, I really feel like Winnipeg should expect to come away with a couple of points here, especially because the defense for Nashville is now considerably weaker without Wilsby. Wilsby's been a huge find, and he is temporarily injured. So, assuming he's not healthy enough to go later, you've got Josie and Barron on the first pairing, Shea and Blankenberg on the second, and then Stastny and Shen on the third. Now, Josie is always, scary, right? Just always a big threat on the power play. Probably the one guy on this blue line you have to worry about. Everyone else, I don't really stress too much about, but I think for Winnipeg, just keep it clean. Don't give Josi any free looks. Try to cut off those trailing shooters, which has kind of been how the Preds have occasionally created some offense out of stuff. Josi is especially good at this. And I think you do come away with 2 points. But, I've said that the past couple of games has not come easy for some reason. And I guess I just wonder, for Winnipeg this season, what are they seeing with the squad? Are they seeing the same problems that some of us are? And I'm not an NHL coach. I don't have coaching experience. I'm not going to sit there and say that I know more than an NHL coach, but I'm sure that a lot of the same stuff that some of us have pointed out, they're probably seeing too. And I just feel like we arrive at different conclusions on how to fix it. I think that there are some considerations that they absolutely have to make that we don't have to worry about. There are HR considerations, locker room problems, different things like that you have to worry about. You've got the front office also probably providing insight and input on who they want to see having more ice time. And I get all that. But I think the Jets at some point, if it's holding Arneal back, then that's not going to be great, right? But if this is really how Arneal sees this team, I'm not as sold on him as I was at the start of the season. I still think that he's shown some interesting thought processes and some stuff that, is pretty forward thinking, but I think there are other parts of his coaching decisions and perhaps lineup choices where I'm left a little perplexed. And I just sort of wonder, what is the real version of Arneal that we're going to see in the playoffs? Is he going to be able to adapt to a top level contender? How will he try to manage those minutes and combat teams that are just, frankly, more talented than the Jets are? And I don't mean that Colorado as a whole is more talented, but we've seen what happens with the Avs, right? They've got a couple of key players. Those guys win their minutes, and it just makes life a lot easier for their depth lines to then have a surprising advantage against the Jets. That speed that they have where they can just sort of bring the puck around back and forth, just getting the Jets real tired. It's a nice way for them to kind of minimize whatever sort of defensive advantage the Jets might have on the whole. So, I sort of wonder, once you start moving past the Nashvilles, the Anaheims, and these other teams that are maybe struggling this year, can Winnipeg get its stuff together? I mean, that's kind of, it's strange to say that about a team in first place, and one that I am saying, I expect to beat Nashville tomorrow or later this evening, but I kind of find myself in the same spot that I've been in the past couple of years where I'm still not sure how I feel about this team. Winnipeg earlier this year really impressed me. Things have kind of slowed down. And in those quieter moments where the Jets maybe aren't creating as much, or maybe they're not getting as much, as many great, amazing saves from Hellebuck, maybe he has a couple of off games, how will this team respond? And, a couple of losses now in a row. Yes, they did get a point against Anaheim, but For all intents and purposes, yes, they lost, and you would expect them to have beaten both Anaheim and Detroit, and they didn't. So, uh, you're going to drop games against stinkers all the time. It happens. But I think for Winnipeg, if they're really serious about fixing what's kind of ailed them the last few years, we really need to see this team rethink the way that they're doing things. And I just don't think the team is willing to do that. Teams, like Nashville present great opportunities, especially while you have a big standings advantage to try and experiment a bit. I know there are reasons why you shouldn't. You don't always want to mess with the chemistry, and you don't want to piss guys off, but I don't know, man. At some point, this team is just going to have to make some hard choices, maybe ruffle some feathers, and try and get guys uncomfortable, because I feel like that's the only way this team is ever going to grow. But, it is what it is. I can say this till I'm blue in the face, and it may not matter at the end. So hopefully, the Jets have more than one playoff win this postseason, right? Now, related to that, David Pagnotta had some rumors and storylines in one of his daily articles, and one of them implicated the Jets and perhaps their unwillingness to, trade for a big name. And I want to chat about that in just a brief moment, because I'll be honest, I'm not sold on that perspective on things. But before we chat about that, just wanted to let you know about Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That's sometimes happened to me. I've had plenty of sports and pop media streaming accounts, and sometimes you buy a package deal with one and you find out that you're actually paying for this, another service twice over because it got bundled in and you had a separate subscription. Rocket Money knows it's annoying, and they help you track all of them down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subs, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. If you want to save money like me, cancel your unwanted subscriptions, and reach your financial goals, do it faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Hey friends, welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for rejoining us as we are chatting and following up on something I mentioned about David Pagnotta's comments about the Jets perhaps not wanting to trade for more than a depth defenseman over the next couple of months. I'm going to be honest, I don't buy it. I know that I've been a little tough on the Jets this year at times. I've also felt like I've been, perhaps not tough enough in some other areas. But if there's one thing that I tend to trust the Jets to try and do, it's legitimately address lineup issues. And I think, the 2C role right now remains a pretty big challenge. That spot has been a bit of a sore one for Winnipeg. Nemesnikov's been kind of swapped around the past couple of weeks. I don't always know if the Jets feel like they can make an upgrade there. Sometimes the way that Arneal tries to work around problems, I feel like he's maybe missing the bigger picture on Nemesnikov, not really just being able to handle that responsibility anymore. Maybe he does know, and maybe he feels like they don't really want to mess with things too much, and so they're just going to leave it as is. I don't know. I can't speak for him. But I do think Winnipeg is aware that it's been an issue, right? They've started swapping Lowry into the 2C role a little more frequently in the last couple of games, but then they don't always stick with it, right? And I don't understand why they do that. But I think from, the front office perspective, they're probably pretty aware that the team as it is right now has kind of been just so-so at 5v5. And 5v5 is one of the biggest indicators of what you're going to do later in the season and perhaps the postseason. Good 5v5 teams are often pretty decent playoff teams. They may not be, they might get to the postseason and fall apart, but usually the better 5v5 teams are the ones that tend to go far. Florida's a good one. Colorado's been a good one. Vegas has been a good one. Obviously, you'll have outliers, but for the most part, If you play well at even strength, which you're predominantly playing at anyways, you're probably going to have a deeper playoff run. And I think, the front office is probably looking at that 2C gap and is like, how on earth are we going to fix it this year? The good news is that there's going to be a lot of options. Elias Pettersson might somehow be on the market, which, I would be unbelievably like gobsmacked if the Jets even remotely had a chance at him. I'm sure that that's never going to happen. Maybe just in fan fiction, but, in the famous words of Dumb and Dumber, you're saying there's a chance. Yeah, 1 in a million. Perhaps there is little a little more manageable. A guy of his caliber, or another player in a similar tier. I heard the asking price starts with a first rounder for Brock. I would easily pay that. He's a 70+ point center on a bad Islanders team, mind you, a team that doesn't score that much. He still has had like 150 points the last couple of seasons. So I think he's pretty dang good. I think he'd be a really big fit for the Jets. I continue to pound that drum just because he's a good skater. He's a big body. He's got soft hands, and he actually plays well at 5v5. If you're looking for that guy who could actually be your shadow 1C, arguably Nelson is the dude. So a player of that tier I think would be great. I also was thinking about, the Jets may be trying for somebody with some term, right? A little bit of contract control, because they've got Hellebuck and Scheifele locked up. They've got Nino under term. They've got DeMello locked up. There's a fair few number of players who have signed for a good bit, which means that you've got some competitive window to work with. Probably this year and next. After that, a little more questionable. Ehlers is probably not here next year. Connor, I think he'll extend at some point. I don't know how much it's going to be, and I sort of worry about that price tag. But, looking at all of these different parts, will Perfetti be around? Probably. I think there are other guys who could, return. Obviously, Velarde seems like he's pretty comfortable, pretty happy. And so, I just don't really see the Jets sitting idly this year. A depth defender would be helpful, no doubt about it, but not really a needle mover. And when you look at the playoff bracket and picture for the Jets, there's just not that many elite teams. And so if you really feel like you've got a shot this year, which when Hellebuck's playing at the Vezina level that he is, I would hope that they take it. I hope that they don't look at it as this team is good enough, let's roll with it. I don't think that they view it that way. I think that they are more aware of their problems. I just think it's going to come down to how much it costs to fix it, right? Winnipeg is very flush with some pretty good prospects. They've got, Walton and he both with really big trade values. Not that I really want to do that, but if you want to make a big power play, you might have some prospects that other, teams might be keen on. You could look at moving a Perfetti if the right deal comes along. Again, I would really want that to be the right deal. I think Perfetti is a very good player, and I think his recent struggles are less to do with him than his line chemistry, but might be a separate conversation. I just think Winnipeg, is not going to back off, right? They've already been aggressive at other trade deadlines. Last year, they did Toffoli and Monahan in the same window. So why wouldn't they do that again? They tried bringing Monahan back. They know the 2C spot is a sore one. It just makes sense that they're going to try and figure out something to solve it. So for me, just going for a depth defender, I don't think that's Winnipeg's play. Maybe it happens in the next couple of weeks, specifically for a defenseman in light of all the injuries. But beyond that, I'm sure the Jets are wanting to bring in a big name skater of some sort. And I'm curious to know who you would actually want. Let me know your most desired trade assets, and maybe I'll talk about what it might cost to get them and who would be of interest in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day, every day. I'll be back here tomorrow with coverage of Winnipeg versus Nashville. Dear Lord, I hope I get to talk about a win. But that's all we've got for tonight. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets, go.